The Strangers is a 2008 American psychological horror film written and directed by Brian Bertino. The plot follows Kristen, Liv Tyler, and James, Scott Speedman, whose stay at a vacation home is disrupted by three masked criminals who infiltrate the home. The screenplay was inspired by two real-life events, the Manson family Tate murders, a multiple homicide, as well as a series of break-ins that occurred in Bertino's neighborhood as a child. Some journalists noted similarities between the film and the Keddy cabin murders that occurred in Keddy, California in 1981, though Bertino did not cite this as a reference. Rosemary's Baby is a 1968 American psychological horror film written and directed by Roman Polanski, based on the 1967 novel Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. The cast features Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes, Ruth Gordon, Sidney Blackmer, Morris Evans, Ralph Bellamy, Angela Dorian, Clay Tanner, and, in his feature film debut, Charles Grodin. The film chronicles the story of a pregnant woman who suspects that an evil cult wants to take her baby for use in their rituals. The Fly is a 1986 American science fiction body horror film directed and co-written by David Cronenberg. Produced by Brooks Films and distributed by 20th Century Fox. The film stars Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, and John Getz. Loosely based on George Langham's 1957 short story of the same name, the film tells of an eccentric scientist who, after one of his experiments goes wrong, slowly turns into a fly hybrid creature. The score was composed by Howard Shore and the makeup effects were created by Chris Wallace, along with makeup artist Stefan. The Babadook is a 2014 Australian psychological horror film written and directed by Jennifer Kent in her directorial debut, and produced by Christina Satan and Christian Moliere. The film stars Essie Davis, Noah Wiseman, Daniel Henshaw, Hayley McElhinney, Barbara West, and Ben Winspear. It is based on the 2005 short film Monster, also written and directed by Kent. Carrie is a 1976 American supernatural horror film directed by Brian De Palma from a screenplay written by Lawrence D. Cohen, adapted from Stephen King's 1974 epistolary novel of the same name. The film stars Sissy Spacek as Carrie White, a 16-year-old diffident teenager who is consistently mocked and bullied at school. Her peers are unaware that she possesses telekinetic powers. The film also featured Piper Laurie, Amy Irving, Nancy Allen, William Catt, P. J. Souls, Betty Buckley, and John Travolta in supporting roles. It is the first film in the Carrie franchise. The Orphanage, Spanish, El Orfanato, is a 2007 Spanish supernatural horror film and the debut feature of Spanish filmmaker J. A. Bayona. The film stars Belén Rueda as Laura, Fernando Cayo as her husband, Carlos, and Roger Principe as their adopted son Simon. The plot centers on Laura, who returns to her childhood home, an orphanage. Laura plans to turn the house into a home for disabled children. But after an argument with Laura, Simon goes missing. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a 1984 American slasher film written and directed by Wes Craven, and produced by Robert Shea. It is the first installment in the A Nightmare on Elm Street film series and stars Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, Roan Blackley, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, and Johnny Depp in his film debut. The plot concerns 4 teenagers living on one street in the fictitious town of Springwood, Ohio, who are invaded and killed in their dreams, and thus killed in reality, by a burned killer with a bladed leather glove. Don't Look Now is a 1973 English-language film directed by Nicholas Roeg. It is a thriller adapted from the 1971 short story by Daphne du Maurier. Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland portray a married couple who travel to Venice following the recent accidental death of their daughter, after the husband accepts a commission to restore a church. They encounter 2 sisters, one of whom claims to be clairvoyant and informs them that their daughter is trying to contact them and warn them of danger. The husband at first dismisses their claims, but starts to experience mysterious sightings himself. Wolf Creek is a 2005 Australian horror thriller film written, co-produced, and directed by Greg McLean and starring John Jarratt, Nathan Phillips, Cassandra McGrath, and Kirsty Morassi. Its plot concerns 3 backpackers who find themselves taken captive and subsequently hunted by Mick Taylor, a deranged psychopathic xenophobic killer, in the Australian outback. The film was ambiguously marketed as being based on true events, while its plot bore elements reminiscent of the real-life murders of backpackers by Ivan Milat in the 1990s and Bradley Murdoch in 2001, both of which McLean used as inspiration for the screenplay. It Follows is a 2014 American supernatural psychological horror film written and directed by David Robert Mitchell, and starring Nico Monroe, Keir Gilchrist, Daniel Zavato, Jay Query, Olivia Luccardi, and Lily Seep. The film follows a teenage girl named Jay, who is pursued by a supernatural entity after a sexual encounter. The Evil Dead, originally released as Book of the Dead, is a 1981 American supernatural horror film written and directed by Sam Raimi, produced by Robert Tapert and executive produced by Raimi, Tapert, and Bruce Campbell, who also starred alongside Ellen Sandwich, Richard DeManiker, Betsy Baker, and Teresa Tilly. The film focuses on 5 college students vacationing in an isolated cabin in a remote wooded area. After they find an audio tape that, when played, releases a legion of demons and spirits, 4 members of the group suffer from demonic possession, forcing the 5th, Ash Williams, Campbell, to survive the resulting gory mayhem. Saw is a 2004 American horror film 2-3, directed by James Wan, in his feature directorial debut, and written by Lee Wan from a story by Wan and Wan. It stars Wan, Carrie Elves, Danny Glover, Monica Potter, Michael Emerson, Ken Leung, and Tobin Bell. It is the first installment in the Saw film series. In it, Wan and Elves portray 2 men who awake to find themselves chained in a large dilapidated bathroom, with one being ordered to kill the other or his family will die. The screenplay was written by Wan, who co-created the story with Wan in their screenwriting debuts respectively. "28 Days Later" is a 2002 British post-apocalyptic horror film directed by Danny Boyle, written by Alex Garland, and starring Cillian Murphy, Naomie Harris, Christopher Eccleston, Megan Burns, and Brendan Gleeson. The plot depicts the breakdown of society following the accidental release of a highly contagious virus and focuses upon the struggle of four survivors, Murphy, Harris, Burns, and Gleason, to cope with the destruction of the life they once knew while evading those infected by the virus. The Silence of the Lambs is a 1991 American psychological horror film directed by Jonathan Demme from a screenplay written by Ted Talley, adapted from Thomas Harris' 1988 novel of the same name. The film stars Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, Scott Glenn, Ted Levine, and Anthony Heald. In the film, Clarice Starling, a young FBI trainee, seeks the advice of the imprisoned Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a brilliant psychiatrist and cannibalistic serial killer, to apprehend another serial killer, known only as Buffalo Bill, who skinned his female victims' corpses. The novel was Harris' first and second respectively to feature the characters of Starling and Lecter, and was the second adaptation of a Harris novel to feature Lecter, preceded by the Michael Mann-directed Manhunter. Halloween is a 1978 American slasher film directed and scored by John Carpenter, co-written with producer Deborah Hill, and starring Donald Pleasence and Jamie Lee Curtis in her film debut. The plot tells about a mental patient who was committed to a sanitarium for murdering his teenage sister on Halloween night when he was 6 years old. 15 years later, he escapes and returns to his hometown, where he stalks a female babysitter and her friends, while under pursuit by his psychiatrist. The Thing is a 1982 American science fiction horror film directed by John Carpenter and written by Bill Lancaster. Based on the 1938 John W. Campbell Jr. novella Who Goes There? It tells the story of a group of American researchers in Antarctica who encounter the eponymous Thing, a parasitic extraterrestrial life form that assimilates, then imitates other organisms. The group is overcome by paranoia and conflict as they learn that they can no longer trust each other and that any one of them could be the Thing. The film stars Kurt Russell as the team's helicopter pilot, R.J. McReady, and features A. Wilford Brimley, T. K. Carter, David Klein, Keith David, Richard Dysart, Charles Hallahan, Peter Maloney, Richard Masur, Donald Moffat, Joel Polis, and Thomas G. Waits in supporting roles. Paranormal Activity is a 2007 American supernatural horror film produced, written, directed, photographed and edited by Oren Peel. It centers on a young couple, Katie Featherston and Marcus Lode, who are haunted by a supernatural presence in their home. They then set up a camera to document what is haunting them. The film utilizes found footage conventions that were mirrored in the later films of the series. The Blair Witch Project is a 1999 American supernatural horror film written, directed and edited by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. It tells the fictional story of three student filmmakers, Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard, who hike in the Black Hills near Burkittsville, Maryland in 1994 to film a documentary about a local legend known as the Blair Witch. The three disappeared, but their equipment and footage is discovered a year later. The purportedly recovered footage is the film the viewer sees. Funny Games is a 1997 Austrian psychological thriller film written and directed by Michael Honk, and starring Suzanne Lothar, Ulrich Mude, and Arno Frisch. The plot involves two young men who hold a family hostage and torture them with sadistic games in their vacation home. The film was entered into the 1997 Cannes Film Festival. A remake filmed and set in the United States was released in 2007, also directed by Hong, this time with a different cast and a mostly American crew. Ring is a 1998 Japanese horror film directed by Hideo Nakata, based on the 1991 novel by Koji Suzuki. The film stars Nanako Matsushima, Hiroyuki Sanada, and Rikiya Otaka, and follows a reporter who is racing to investigate the mystery behind a cursed videotape that kills the viewer 7 days after watching it. Alien is a 1979 science fiction horror film directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon. Based on a story by O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, it follows the crew of the commercial space tug Nostromo, who encounter the eponymous alien, a deadly and aggressive extraterrestrial set loose on the ship. The film stars Tom Skerritt, Sigourney Weaver, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton, John Hurt, Ian Holm, and Yaphet Kotto. It was produced by Gordon Carroll, David Giler, and Walter Hill through their company Brandywine Productions, and was distributed by 20th Century Fox. Giler and Hill revised and made additions to the script. Shusett was executive producer. The alien and its accompanying artifacts were designed by the Swiss artist H.R. Geiger, while concept artists Ron Cobb and Chris Foss designed the more human settings. The Shining is a 1980 psychological horror film produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick and co-written with novelist Diane Johnson. The film is based on Stephen King's 1977 novel of the same name and stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, and Danny Lloyd. The film's central character is Jack Torrance, Nicholson, an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic who accepts a position as the off-season caretaker of the isolated historic Overlook Hotel on the Colorado Rockies. Wintering over with Jack are his wife, Wendy Torrance, Duvall, and young son, Danny Torrance, Lloyd. Danny possesses the shining, psychic abilities that enable him to see into the hotel's horrific past. The hotel cook, Dick Halloran, Crothers, also has this ability and is able to communicate with Danny telepathically. The hotel had a previous winter caretaker who went insane and killed his family and himself. After a winter storm leaves the Torrances snowbound, Jack's sanity deteriorates due to the influence of the supernatural forces that inhabit the hotel, placing his wife and son in The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 American slasher film directed by Tobe Hooper and written and co-produced by Hooper and Kim Henkel. It stars Marilyn Burns, Paul A. Partain, Edwin Neal, Jim Saito, and Gunnar Hansen, who respectively portray Sally Hardesty, Franklin Hardesty, the hitchhiker, the proprietor, and Leatherface. The film follows a group of friends who fall victim to a family of cannibals while on their way to visit an old homestead. The film was marketed as being based on true events to attract a wider audience and to act as a subtle commentary on the era's political climate, although the character of Leatherface and minor story details were inspired by the crimes of murderer Ed Gein. Its plot is largely fictional. The Exorcist is a 1973 American supernatural horror film directed by William Friedkin and produced and written for the screen by William Peter Blatty. based on the 1971 novel of the same name by Blatty. The film stars Ellen Burstyn, Max von Sydow, Lee J. Cobb, Kitty Wynn, Jack McGowan, in his final film role, Jason Miller, and Linda Blair. It is the first installment in the Exorcist film series, and follows the demonic possession of a 12-year-old girl and her mother's attempt to rescue her through an exorcism conducted by two priests. The Omen is a 1976 supernatural horror film directed by Richard Donner, written by David Seltzer, and starring Gregory Peck, Lee Remick, David Warner, Harvey Spencer Stevens, Billy Whitelaw, Patrick Troughton, Martin Benson, and Leo McKern. Its plot follows Damien Thorne, a young child replaced at birth by an American diplomat unbeknownst to his wife, after their biological child dies shortly after birth. As a series of mysterious events and violent deaths occur around the family as Damien enters childhood, they come to learn he is in fact the Antichrist.